All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the show. Today, we are privileged to have Steve Price, who is the founder of Price Real Estate, a fully integrated commercial real estate company with properties ranging from undeveloped shovel-ready parcels of land to master planned business parks. Founded in 2002, the Price portfolio has grown to an institutional grade portfolio of developments and properties strategically focused on distribution, manufacturing, medical and life science, e-commerce, and related supply chain options. And I'm sure that is just scratching the surface, Steve, of what you do and what you have done. But I'm glad you're here to talk with us today. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for hosting us and me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited for this one. So I usually love to start the conversation, Steve, by talking a bit about your upbringing. So any influences that you had in your childhood or teenage years that would have formed who you are today?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks, because it's always a part of our history that leads to who we are. So my mother is a third generation Utahn, born during the Depression in Paiute County. My father was a war refugee, came out of Nazi Germany, went to Panama, eventually New York, and came out west to work during college in the uranium mines, got stuck for a year. Once he earned enough money, he came to Salt Lake City to take a train back to New York and finished his education at CCNY, and had met my mother. And the day before they left, he stayed for a few extra days and then stayed for a few extra months, enrolled at the University of Utah, finished his education as a mining engineer. My mother was at Pasadena City College. She transferred back to the U, and she finished as well as an English major, so the first gen to go to college, both sides, and got married. And very, very quickly, my father moved from mining and engineering into construction. And he had met people like Joe Albertson, D. Smith, Fred Meyer, J.C. Penney, and many of the car dealers. So Larry Miller early, the Strongs early. He had met Dwayne Brown, who eventually sold to Jerry Seiner. And so by the time I was 6, 7 years old, he was building car dealerships throughout the Mountain West. And he was building retail for some of our early retailers. So Elliott Wolf Sporting Goods. Roger McGillis, Sunset Sporting Goods, which eventually rolled into Udisco in the mid 80s. And so I grew up around the birth of really retail, and that led to the first regional malls. And when I saw those malls being built, that was probably the mid to late 70s. My father purchased Cottonwood Mall, which was the first re-enclosed mall in America, built by Sid Harmon. And then he went on to build another 37 malls. So I could see the birth of retail and development and construction and what that led to.
Wow. So your father was involved in the construction of 37 malls?
Yeah, he built about 100. He built 145 strip and community centers, owned them all, and 37 malls, and maybe owned another 10, as well as office and industrial along the way.
Wow. So talk about, being born and part of the real estate, industry from a young age. I mean, you saw your father doing all of that. Must have impacted you quite a bit.
When you grew up in a family like that, and there are certain individuals that do, business is life, life is business. Yeah. They were porous. There was no difference. So usually on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday nights, my parents were at the Townhouse, Ambassador Club, or Alta Club, and we were there. From the time we were really small, and they're hosting events, they're working with people. My parents were young compared to those other scions. So my father was ZCMI's only landlord, and he was the landlord all throughout the Mountain West. And so it was a very diverse portfolio. As Joe Albertson started to grow, as D. Smith after his first store in Brigham City, Smith's Food and Drug started to grow, when Fred Meyer wanted to come into this market and grew. I knew all of those individuals. When my father went into regional malls, Gap and Old Navy, the Fisher Brothers, Bill Dillard with regional malls. So I probably skied with Bill maybe 30 winters in a row between his house in Zermatt and his house in Vail. And so I just grew up in and around those entrepreneurs that were building those businesses.
Amazing. And how was your father capitalizing these projects? Was he raising money from investors, or did he?
So in that era, it was easy compared to this era here. However, the debt was recourse. So you could finance a project for 125%. Okay. And what my father did that many developers didn't do is he would use that over financing and roll it into the next project, My parents have only ever lived in 2 houses. I've only ever lived in 1 house for the time I've been in Utah, except for 9 years I've been here my whole life. So my parents were frugal and lived within their means. Not everyone did. And so they would roll that capital into the next project.
That makes sense. Yeah, smart. So then going from seeing all of this at a young age, did you have a desire from that age to go into real estate, to follow your father's footsteps and be an entrepreneur?
Super good question. So the answer is probably not. He was really diversified by the 80s. He had steel operations. He had bought Salt Lake Hardware Company and spun about 60 companies out of Salt Lake Hardware, not just the real estate, but the businesses. He owned radio and television stations before deregulation in '93 throughout the country. And I chose broadcasting coming through and out of college. And actually moved to Modesto and then Redding and then Boise and then Reno. And I was really looking at broadcasting. I was on the sales side, not the programming side. And that's where I began.
So broadcasting, and when you say that, are you talking about journalism or radio?
AM and FM radio.
Okay, so radio broadcasting. Yep. Okay, and I guess why did that interest you? What was it about it that piqued your interest?
It was kind of my own thing. It could be different.
Yeah.
If you can sell airtime, you can sell anything. So the one thing about radio is you can't see, touch, or taste it, and except for ratings. You don't really know that it works. You can do a remote and you can see what the turnout is. But I just assumed that if I could hone those skills selling radio, AM, harder than FM, that I could probably sell anything.
And so it was advertisements within radio? Or,
yes.
Okay. Yeah. So selling it. And was it local networks that you were, like local stations that you were working with?
That's a really good question. So each radio station across America has a footprint. The footprint's based on how far you can broadcast. So what your range or radius is. So AM tends to go further. It's the reason that now you can hear radio from LA here in Salt Lake City. Mm-hmm. FM is a tighter band or footprint. And so each of those define the markets in America based on the way the FCC would grant licenses for an FM station, for example, to broadcast. And so you have two sides. You've got the programming side, the content we listen to, and then you have the sales side. So I was on the sales side.
Okay. That's amazing. So when did you start? At what age was this out of college? Did you go to college? I want to back up a little bit there.
It's a super good question. So I began at the University of Utah and kind of got off track. And just had to kind of settle down and get things together in life. So I actually moved to California and finished at California State University. And eventually graduated. It took a long time. It's interesting. I'm a trustee at the University of Utah. There are only 6 of us appointed by the governor. About 7 years ago when that was going to happen, I had to sit down with the governor and say, Governor, if you look at my transcript at the University of Utah, it's not very good. And I didn't want to embarrass the president at that time either. And I said, gosh, I better sit down. We better have a candid conversation here about maybe what my transcript looked like when I first began. That was President Pershing. And they said, there are a lot of students like you. There are a lot of students that are on the 6-7 year plan. It's not because of work. It takes them a while to get things together. And we think that you'll understand and relate to that student and represent them well. And so I eventually graduated, and now I serve as a trustee at the U.
There you go. That's full circle. And so coming out of university in California, you start selling radio, selling advertising.
So I sold AM radio in the Central Valley of California.
Okay.
And it was a 50,000 watt station, but it was a classical station. It's really hard to sell classical music. It's farm country. The Central Valley of California produces 30% of the food crop in America, 100% of the almonds, 100% of the cherries. And it was really, really hard to sell AM radio. However, my boss, the GM of the station, kept me there, sent me to a Dale Carnegie course, probably as important for me as college was, or some of my college. And I went through that whole series and eventually figured out with Implement and Farm and car dealers and so many others, had to sell them AM radio. And then I migrated to the FM side.
Okay. So how long were you in radio sales?
9 years.
9 years. Okay. So come out of school, you don't immediately have a desire to follow in your father's footsteps into real estate. You're doing radio sales. How long or I guess at what point did that maybe start to change? How did that evolve over those 9 years?
Chase, that's a good question. I had no intention into going into real estate. However, my wife was from Idaho, and my father built all 5 malls in Idaho. So Idaho Falls, Twin Falls, Pocatello, Boise, and Coeur d'Alene. And Boise was under construction, and I'd flown through Boise one Thanksgiving to meet my in-laws in Sun Valley, Idaho. And he said, just spend a couple hours. Come to the mall. It was under construction. The first level was, but it's a super regional. It's over 1 million feet, 5 anchors.
Yeah.
And I went to the mall, and I could see as I approached the site, the earth movers moving dirt. I could smell the dirt. I went into the job trailer. I saw the team building the mall. I just knew that day that I had to switch, and I just knew that I had to migrate to real estate. So that was Thanksgiving. By early January, I was living in Boise. Okay. And so I'd left broadcasting, and I was on the construction team that spent 1.5 years building the regional mall. And then I became the first assistant manager of the mall. As assistant manager, you also oversee marketing, and I'd come out of broadcasting, so that was relatively easy. I also opened my first business in the mall. I opened an Orange Julius in the mall when the mall opened. Within 6 months, I'd opened a Sbarro's Pizza. Within another 6 months, I'd opened a Great Steak and Potato. Within a year, I'd purchased my first site for my first industrial building I built was in Boise. So my second daughter was born in Boise. So as I could start to see what the possibility of entrepreneurism was, and working at a family business, which was private at that time, and I started to see industrial just in the market, it kind of changed my life for sure.
Sure. So what year was this that you moved up to Idaho?
1988.
1988. How old were you about that time?
In 80, that's a super good question. I was 28, 29 years old.
28, 29. Okay. So you decided to transition into real estate. And then you mentioned some of those restaurants. Were those like franchise?
I was a franchisee. See, a franchisor or franchisee. I was a franchisee.
Okay. Franchisee. I mean, we could go into story there. I opened a Crumble. I've sold that since, but that's a whole world in itself. Did you keep doing that, or was that kind of short-lived?
41 restaurants.
Okay.
And eventually, during COVID, I sold those off to each of our managers, and it did two things. It allowed me more time to focus, and I had a partner by then, an operating business, to focus on real estate, and it gave each of our long-term managers a chance of a lifetime to own their own business.
Sure. So
some had been with us 25, 30 years.
Yeah. So you got up to 40 locations, 41 locations.
Off the Mountain West.
And that's between the Sbarro, the Orange Julius, those are
Edo of Japan. So as a franchisee, different concepts.
Very, very cool. Okay. So, and then you start as the manager of the mall, which I think is an incredible assistant manager of the mall, which gives you kind of that day-to-day experience on the leasing side, the operational side. I mean, how beneficial was that to be?
Well, I'll tell you what I saw. You had really two sides of the business. You have the anchor tenants and you have the inline shop tenants. So the way that regional malls work is you have to give away, especially in Nordstrom or Dillard's, you really have to give away the land in the building. And where developers make their cash flow or their return is through the inline shop tenants. Sometimes your parcel out pads. And there were times where the regional malls in America were where the department stores in America were really strong. Very, very dynamic. And there were other times where the inline shop tenants were really, really dynamic. So I watched Limited grow, for example, with their men's and women's concepts. And then their stock was down, and then Bon Marché and ZCMI and Dillard's and Mervyn's, a lot of those concepts aren't even here anymore. Those regional mall or those regional mall anchor tenants are gone. Those department stores are gone. And then I started to see the cart and kiosk program. So it's kind of like today, it's just different. So if someone had an idea, you'd want to move into a cart during the holiday season. If you could make a cart work, maybe you moved into a kiosk year round. If a kiosk worked, maybe you could move into an inline shop tenant, or if you were really fortunate, maybe one of the department stores would pick up your product, whatever it was. So I watched a new kind of birth of retail happening. Yeah,
it's amazing. Yeah, great experience. So at this point, you're working with your dad. At what point did you transition? You mentioned the first industrial project that you did. What was that transition like to, okay, I'm working with my dad, or did that continue throughout your career for the next little while?
I never really worked with my dad.
Okay.
They were headquartered in Salt Lake City. They had 660 employees all through the Mountain West. So eventually I moved to California and I took a break and I worked for Walmart.
Okay.
For 2 years. So I did real estate selection for Walmart in the Inland Empire of California, so Riverside, San Bernardino counties. So I actually worked for Walmart doing site selection, finding Walmart stores. And so that really helped me see how to put these projects together. and then spent another 2 years with Smith's Food and Drug as they were trying to expand into the IE, the Inland Empire. Never really worked for them. And then joint venture a Smith's potentially together with a Walmart before Walmart went into food.
Interesting. Okay, so then you leave. Was it called Price Development Company? What was your?
Yeah,
okay, that was the name
Price
of
Development Company.
your dad's business. So,
yeah, I moved to California.
So you go to Idaho, you go
my
back
third
to
child
California.
was born in L.A.
Okay, cool.
So my son was Garrett, who's with us now, was born in L.A. So I couldn't handle flying into and out of between Boise and Ontario, California, the IE. It was too big. So I eventually moved there.
Moved full time. You work with Walmart, doing some
I chose the closest model house to the 91.
There you go.
Right in South Riverside County. So I could work that market within 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Any site.
I know that area. My wife's from Corona.
I lived in Corona.
Our first child was
Not
born in
Corona
Riverside.
Del Mar. Yeah, I lived in Corona.
Yeah, Corona. People think Corona Del Mar. It's
No,
like,
the Riverside
no.
exit. I was there.
My first son was born in Riverside. So anyway, small world. So you're doing that work with Walmart. I guess at what point did you, how long were you doing that? When did you decide to transition back?
So what changed was the resolution trust era. It changed everything for real estate because the tax laws dramatically changed. It changed everything for limited partners, tax shelters, really led by Keating and others with the savings and loan crisis. And so in 90 to 91, I talked with my father and he said, gosh, would you want to move back to Salt Lake City and move back into real estate? And we're going to go through some layoffs and other things. My father also had purchased First Securities Bank savings and loan in Idaho. And the feds were looking at every developer he just never lent to himself that had any banking relationships. And the resolution trust era was really catastrophic in many ways, but kind of redefined things for real estate and tax law in America. So in 1991, I moved back to Salt Lake City. And at that point in time, I moved it to the leasing side, which is like sales kind of. And I had strip and community centers, and I didn't like them. In the TCBY era, and that was the era, they were the anchor tenant. It was kind of like Starbucks or Chick-fil-A today. It's who you wanted in your retail center. I just didn't like it. And so I had a chance, an opportunity to switch one weekend with someone who was managing the industrial. Tony Romney, he didn't like industrial. He wanted to get back on the retail side. So the core business was regional malls, but with dozens and dozens of stripping community centers anchored by grocery and drug throughout the Mountain West, he had a lot more work and I had a lot fewer buildings, but bigger buildings. So I started working in the Northwest quadrant of Salt Lake City by 91, leasing industrial buildings.
Got it. Okay. So you're back with Price Development. You're now working on the industrial side doing leasing. And then I had read that at some point, Price Development had a transition with going public, and maybe we're not there yet.
You're very attentive. So coming out of the resolution trust era, large developers in America, all the debt was recourse. 100% was recourse.
Yeah.
And so the Simons, who owned the Colts and Pacers, large developer, regional mall developer, went public. DeBartolo's on the 49ers, go public. And so these really large companies that had regional malls, and you're talking 100 malls, 150 malls throughout America, because that was the era, all start going public. And so the largest transfer from private to public hands of all real estate. It happened with Prologis, with industrial. It happened with multifamily. It happened with office. That's where Sam Zell Equity. Sam was really the first billionaire in America from real estate, office primarily. So equity office. Buzz Oates in California was the first billionaire in America from real estate. Really hard to do, especially in that era. And so they were all going public. And so my father, with the debt that he had and other pressures, formed a public company listed on the New York Stock Exchange. I think only the second in Utah at that time, here in Salt Lake City. And so formed a REIT in 93.
Okay, 93. And so at this point, you're doing industrial leasing for the company. I mean, I guess what was the next step for you after seeing the company go public?
I was never an officer or an executive. So I had some freedom and flexibility. So I had restaurants that were growing. I'd done my first industrial development in Boise with a partner. I'd bought my first industrial building in Albuquerque. I actually brought my two sisters. I have two younger sisters into that project. And so I could start to see that maybe industrial would work. Also, my father had purchased 20 acres in Draper to build the next R.C. Willey. R.C. Willey sold at that time the Childs family, Bill Childs, to Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire Hathaway, different plans, said, no, you're going to Boise, you're going to Ontario, California, you're going to Vegas, and then maybe you can consider another store in Salt Lake City. So my father had sold his construction yard when he shut down his construction business in 1969 to the Childs family. That's where the R.C. Willey came from at 2200 South and 3rd West. And so John was going to build the second R.C. Willey. That land was available. It was dang good pheasant hunting in Draper at that time. And I said, I want to buy that 20 acres. Don't sell it. And that's where our first business park began when I started building that in 99.
Got it. So 99. And then going back to your first industrial development, I do. Would you consider that your real kind of first standalone project, Steve? That one you mentioned, or what would be the best case study for like this was my first?
Probably Boise, Idaho, for a reason. So I'd found a site. My father had a partner, and his partner used to run real estate for First Security Bank. And after First Security Bank shut down the real estate in the 80s, they became partners. And Jack came to me and said, Steve, Boise, you've lived there. Let's build this building together. Mm-hmm. And I had the site. I was just down the street from the mall. So Jack and Skip, his son, and John and I became partners in that real estate. We built the building. And I leased the building, so I could see that cycle. I could see how you build a building, and believe me, we didn't know what we were building. We didn't know the clear height, the column-based spacing, the thickness of floors, truck docks, truck ratios, fire suppression systems. There were lots of things we didn't know at that point in time. Sure. But I could see other buildings, and luckily I had a good architect, and luckily I had a good builder, Steed, who's in this market now, and they kind of saved us with the kind of a building. So that was probably the first prototype of what could happen.
Okay. And how did you capitalize that?
I used Jack and John's balance sheet. Okay. Once we get 95% leased, and I do the same thing today, I go to permanent markets, so life and pension companies.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And early on, there's always dependency on the right people, partners, and being able to get it done. And how big was that building?
That was 122,000 feet. Since then, I bought out everyone.
Okay, got it.
I bought out everyone over time.
So you successfully leased that one. That's number one. Okay. So then fast forward.
Well, the next year I purchased a building. I went down to Albuquerque, New Mexico to look at an Edo of Japan. It was going to be my next franchise concept, Japanese concept, and for a regional mall. Mm-hmm. And there are only 3 ways to cross the Rio Grande. And so I was on a road called Paseo del Norte, and I saw a for sale sign with an industrial building. And I was kind of late for my meeting with Mr. Edo. Didn't have cell phones, and I said, gosh, I said to the broker, you've just got to tell him I've got to run and look at this building. And within an hour, I had it under contract. It was a front-loaded building. So I had a back-loaded building in Boise, a front-loaded building in Albuquerque. And I didn't even know how I was going to close on it. I just knew that we had to have that building. I still own it today.
Oh, wow.
And so that was the first acquisition.
Got it. Okay. And from the get-go, was your mentality more so on development or acquisition, or was it kind of dependent upon market and cycle?
Chase, I was just entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do my own thing. And we didn't really know and understand then how industrial was going to work or the supply chain. What I knew is there was a building, and I had to have a broker. Hard to lease buildings with sign calls, even starting by the 90s. Mm-hmm. And we maybe a demise well, an office. That's all that we knew at that point in time. And actually, although the MSA is the same size market, Albuquerque and Boise, the counties are about the same size. They're radically different markets. And so none of that did we know. So for example, because of the national labs in Albuquerque, we had aerospace and defense tenants. We didn't have any of those in Boise. In Boise, we had former entrepreneurial businesses or a business that would have a small presence, with the DC being in Salt Lake City or Kent, Washington, the Kent distribution, the Kent Valley. And so if they had 100,000 feet in Salt Lake City, they'd have 10 or 15,000 in Boise. So we had to figure all these things out.
Yeah, of course. And that building you bought in Albuquerque, was that leased at the time or was it vacant?
Yep. I had a tenant there, Bunzl Papercraft, 2 different companies.
Okay. So it was fully leased when you bought it. And then what was the business plan there to let them, expire and
I'm not
raise
as
their rent?
advanced as you are.
Okay.
I did not know. At that point in time, I just thought we have a building. and we'll figure out how to keep it full, because I was a full-time employee of JP Realty.
Sure.
And that was a massive amount of work. And I had a young growing family.
Yeah. So it sounds like you were kind of, I mean, lack of a better term, moonlighting or side hustle. You're working
hustle.
You're working for the publicly traded company.
Hustle, for sure.
So Price Development becomes JPR. Is that right? Or
yeah, so the company goes public in 93.
Okay.
And then eventually sold and merged in 2002 into General Growth Properties.
Okay.
Out of Chicago. So they were another really large developer like the DeBartolos or the Simons or the Kimco family. And that company merged on July 10th, 2002.
Okay, got it. So was your father still involved throughout all of this, the going public, the merger? How was his transition?
That's a really good question. So my parents, because of my mother, we've only talked about my father's side, really was getting involved in the arts by 1970. And she really felt that it was important to give back to community. So they built a Bravenel Hall. They literally built a Bravenel Hall that exists today. When my father was in the construction business, for half of what the county was going to build it for our bicentennial, the state's bicentennial, the country's bicentennial. And they started giving back to arts and arts organizations to set up their foundation. So she was as prolific in the arts, giving back, building community, as my father was in construction and development. Also, they both had political aspirations. So my father, by 2002, had been appointed by George W. Bush to be U.S. ambassador. That's a process. You have to work your way through federal House and Senate. But the companies were so big by 2000 that there was a president and vice presidents, just like any company of that size would have to be, 110 people in Salt Lake City and South Salt Lake. And so he was chairman, but he was also working on lots of other things. He and my mother in the business daily, but he was working his way through the process of becoming U.S. ambassador.
Got it. Okay. Got it. So he kind of was transitioning more political side of things.
He wanted to give back.
Yeah.
My parents are really committed to giving back.
That's great.
Some consider it a duty. Some consider it an obligation. In my family, it's both.
Yeah. Love that. I love that. And so you're doing your side hustle. You've got building in Boise, building in Albuquerque, and now this 20 acres restaurants going. Now this 20 acres comes about. So I guess, at what point was it like, all right, Price Real Estate, jumping out, doing this by myself?
Every once in a while, life catches you by surprise. And for sure, it caught me by surprise. So second last day of Olympics in 2002, we're leaving the Delta Center. Olympics are two events. It's really slope and ice, so day and night. And so you'd go to the slope, and Summer Olympics are one game. So we'd come from the slope back to the Delta Center, and we just watched short track. We'd watched Apollo on a win and others, and we're walking out. My father says, JP Realty is going to merge. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, we're going to merge. Now, I should have known, because every night in his box at the Olympics, each of those different developers that I've mentioned before, David Simon, who purchased Trolley Square, came to ski, ended up buying Trolley Square from Wally Wright, was in the box. And then I could see the DeBartolos were in the box. At that point in time, they hadn't merged into Simon. And I could see General Growth. I could see all these different really large developers fly into town, spend the night with us Olympics. And so they'd put together a deal with General Growth.
Got it. So yeah, I mean, those are big names. I mentioned work at JP Morgan, and we were in joint ventures with Simon, Westfield, GGP. So these are the
Westfield, Mace Richard, all looked at buying the portfolio.
Yeah. So these are big players in the institutional shopping mall retail space. So that merger goes down. And at that point, you didn't really have a choice if you wanted to keep doing your own projects, right? You kind of had to.
I probably had, Chase, that's good. I probably had 4 or 5 choices. I could work for General Growth. Uh-huh. But I knew that probably those operations would transfer to Oak Brook, Illinois. I could become a broker, and I'd actually talk with Mike Falk and Kyle and a few others, Kyle Roberts and Steve Conde, and I thought, gosh, is that an option? And I thought, gosh, do I want to go into business for myself? I just adopted a little girl from China, our 4th child, and I thought, gosh, I don't know what to do. And as we were working through that 90 days waiting on SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission approval to merge into General Growth, I thought, I think I'm going to go into business for myself. And there were 3 team members, and I was in a unique situation because I was never an officer or an executive. That's how I kind of on the side was able to do certain things. And I probably didn't show the maturity at the time to really be in that leadership core. And on the other side, I couldn't really talk to anyone. My father was highly restricted because of the merger and acquisition and this lockout period. So the merger happened on July 10th, 2002, and 660 people knew that day whether they were hired or they got their exit and termination packages. And about 3/4 were hired. They kept all of our property management. And I got together with 3 individuals and I said, I think I can pay you for 2 years. And for 6 months, we're going to pursue industrial and let's see how it goes. It was a real battle. It was a battle with my father. It was a battle with others because we had such deep retail relationships going back to the 60s with all these retailers. And I just knew that we couldn't do a regional mall. I didn't know how many more cities in America, turn 50,000 people for a small, C market or more. I didn't know how many more grocery stores. Grocery stores on the going home side of the road, right in, right out. Starbucks on the going work side of the road, like McDonald's, right in, right out. And the other retail developers, they're not going to let me in. There's no way. And I wasn't passionate about retail. And I didn't know how many more corners there were left in the Salt Lake Valley. The growth that's here now wasn't happening then. So I chose industrial.
Yeah. And was it, you kind of mentioned why you didn't want to do retail as much, but was there something about industrial that you had foresight? You're like, this is kind of on the up and up.
Chase, this is really important. You've got to have passion about what you do. For sure. Passion is really, really vital. And if you're not passionate about what you're doing, it's really hard to get up and do it every day. And for certain people like you, there's this drive to be self-made. Now, no one's entirely self-made. No one on the face of this planet ever has been or ever will be, because it takes a lot of people to produce, to do something. But I had an idea. And I thought, maybe, we weren't first in industrial. We weren't second in industrial in this market. We were really third in industrial. And the land was relatively cheap. The buildings were relatively inexpensive to build, but we were still only building the 6% returns. And I just thought, we'll just pursue industrial. And with that, I had the first 3 buildings at Lone Peak, 123rd South, that were under construction. They were 18-foot clear. And 95% of our tenants were new. 50% of our own growth comes from our own portfolio, our own tenants. And it's easier today with the funds and others and the way that buildings cycle today, because they're businesses, like you'd mentioned, the Casey's and others, that want to know who their landlord's going to be when they renew. So the biggest warning sign or one of the hardest things for a tenant, for a business, is when you get the estoppel, because 2 things are happening. You're either refinancing, or you're selling the building. And so with our first projects, we built 3 18-foot clear buildings. And within a year or 2, tenants wanted to renew, but they're moving to a 24-foot clear building. I thought, oh gosh, we need a 24. I don't want to lose another tenant. Within a few years, those tenants in a 24-foot clear building say, gosh, we need more dock doors. We want a 28-foot clear building. I thought, gosh, we've got to get a 28-foot clear building. We have tenants that want to renew and businesses that want to grow. And those tenants moving to 28 and then 32. So that's how we started migrating to where the tenants want to be. So we always follow tenants. We're super tenant centric. Many companies and businesses, developers are fund specific, limited partner specific, the general partner fee structure specific. We're really, really different. We have no limited partners. We send out no K1s, but we're 100% focused on our tenants and growing tenants in the Mountain West, in particular in the Utah economy. So if you sign a lease with us, you're going to renew a lease with us. But more than that, tenants go through growth cycles. They go through ups and downs, mergers, acquisitions, partners, breakups, divorce, death, all these things. And if they know that they have a landlord that will be on that journey with them, then potentially they will be more successful, and for us, we'll be more successful. It was that simple.
Makes sense. Very logical. I love it. And at the time that you formally launched Price Real Estate, so 2002, what was like? Did you have historic land holdings? Was it like a blank slate? Was it you had your couple buildings and some restaurants?
So remember, Salt Lake City in 2002 was going through 3 recessions. It's like drinking, getting a hangover, and you say, I never drink. I didn't drink last night. So we had dot bomb. that was really crushing the Wasatch Front and America.
Yeah.
Silicon Slopes really couldn't get going because we had the dot bomb era. We had just come out of 9/11, and 9/11 was particularly devastating, but we had hosted the Olympics without an event. But after the Olympics left, we had 1 million feet of office downtown, 1 million feet of industrial in the Northwest quadrant that was vacant. So it was like another recession.
Yeah.
So you have dot bomb, 9/11, the Olympics, and many of the REITs pulled out of Salt Lake City, pulled out of Utah. And so when Prologis left the market, I was able to buy all of their land holdings.
Oh, wow.
And so I had a farm that I owned in Boise. That's where I was going to begin because I knew Boise really well. So I had a 60-acre farm, and a retail developer who's in this market wanted to buy that farm and do a Costco deal and Edwards Theater and other things. My father, who was a partner at that point in time, worked for the U.S. government because of the emollients clause, had to disclose what he was doing and couldn't develop. So I bought him out, and I sold that farm, and I bought all of Prologis's land in this market.
Amazing.
Every single parcel.
So, and for entrepreneurs getting started, the biggest bottleneck is typically capital. So yeah, how did you manage? I mean, I don't know if there was any sort of liquidity event when you merged, or if you had stock, or if there was something where it's like, hey, I've got this capital to go buy land and take this opportunity, or did you have to raise money or partner?
That's a really good question. You're very insightful. So when you have a REIT, because you take depreciation and deficit restoration obligations and other things to the individual that flows through your balance sheet, there was no liquidity. There was no financial event when my father's companies merged. For he or my mother or my two sisters or myself, there wasn't. Because what you do is you're merging into another company, and you get a preferred return of something called FFO, funds from operation. And so you get what the rest of the investors get. There's no preference. And so my father and I had purchased this farm, and he needed it off his balance sheet. And I was able to buy the farm at what we had paid for it, and it was reasonable. There was no sanitary sewer on the south side of I-84. On the north side was the temple. I could see things that were going to come. Marjorie Post, who really gave me my start, wanted someone she could believe in, and it was me, and I solved some things for her and her family, and I was able to buy that farm and buy out John. That became the seed capital that started us going.
Got it. Wow. So, I mean, and if you can't disclose, but like buying all of Prologis's land in Salt Lake, I mean,
$1.22 a foot.
$1.22 a foot. Okay. Do you still have some of that land, or have you developed all that?
We do still have some of that land. I had to sell some to grow. It's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
I've never sold a building, but I've had to sell land to grow. At that point in time, no one had ever paid $1.22 a foot for industrial.
Yeah. I mean, and just for those listening, I mean, as of a couple of years ago, there was land trading in 30 plus a foot, 35. I mean, now it's probably 25, but it's
in the Northwest quadrant.
In the Northwest quad. I mean, it's accelerated. And
$8 ground today is in Santaquin.
Yeah.
$5 ground is in Tremont.
Yeah. Right.
That's just where the market is. But at that point in time, there was a lot of risk. And the risk was the industrial markets weren't defined. Most of our product was still coming out of the IE Inland Empire of California up I-15, or from the Kent Valley in Seattle. And so Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, the state of Utah, 29 counties, and the Mountain West north of Phoenix wasn't growing like it is today. And so it looks like Steve was a blind squirrel that found a nut, and that is true. But on the other side, at $1.22, Prologis, a very sophisticated REIT, thought that this market wasn't the kind of market they should be in. First Industrial thought the same thing, and they left.
Yeah.
And so there was risk for us in buying that much ground.
So, and how much land was that approximately? Prologis site? It
was probably 30 parcels.
30 parcels. Okay. So you've got piece in Idaho, the Prologis land. And so, yeah, I guess take us over the next 5-6 years. How did you start getting off the ground building these projects?
So I mentioned a 10 and an 18-foot clear building. So we knew by 1978 were things we had to figure out in the industrial business. So most real estate trades on the return. It just does. We were really quite different. I was really quite different. So we had to figure out by 1978, what were these standard units of measure around the world? So all tractor trailers are 53 feet long. 9 feet wide, 9 feet tall. There's a very specific reason for that. And so we knew that every trailer around the world had the same dimensions. We know that sea cargo containers, TEUs, were 20 or 40 feet long. Same dimension as width and height as a semi. We knew that inside the back of a semi, you could put 2 pallets. So the pallet was developed by Budweiser and the DOD in 1942. 42 by 48 inches wide. It's also where a soda can came from, or a beer can. You bind those 6 together, you can stack them 18 tall on a pallet. Pallets do come in different sizes, but 42 by 48, and they won't tip over in a ship, a tanker, or a helicopter. If you bind those 6 packs together, you can stack them 18 tall. In the back of a semi, you can put 2 pallets based on what's stacked on them. You put 2 by 2 and 2 on top. So that's the standard unit of measure. Inside an industrial building, 18-foot clear, you can stack 3 pallet positions with a foot of lift. And you can go 3 in a 28-foot clear building. You can do 4 pallets, stack 4 pallets tall, 32.5. So we started to figure out, how are our tenants operating? How is the supply chain working? What do the tenants need to be successful? So we're super tenant centric because we don't sell buildings. I don't have a fund. There's no life. I don't have, obligations. We have other pressures and things that we have to do, but we don't have those kind of pressures or obligations. And so we started focusing on what the tenant needs in the supply chain. And then we were really fortunate in 2006, 7, 8, the birth of the iPhone. So we could see just-in-time delivery coming to the automotive industry, healthcare and hospitals, clinics. And we started to see it come with the birth of Amazon and others, just-in-time delivery to our house, same-day delivery, 2-day delivery. And so we started modeling our buildings based on our tenants. And then I looked at what John Huntsman had done in 2005. And so John and I were accidental roommates at the Sigma Chi house. And I'd watched what John had done. He'd come back from a U.S. ambassador his first time. He's actually been a U.S. ambassador 3 times. And when he came back from Asia, he brought back GOED, Governor's Office of Economic Development. And within that, he had clusters, economic clusters, things that Utah could do well. So aerospace defense, life science. And so we knew over time we needed to build taller buildings, deeper buildings. Look at the racking. So your column-based spacing is based on your racking, not based on anything else. So what do our tenants need? We had to pioneer and develop concrete floors that no one else in the market's doing, fire suppression systems no one else in the market's doing, figure out how to have buildings with longer longevity, thicker asphalt sections, longer roofs, those kinds of things, which tenants really want. Sure. It keeps their costs low, but also helps them focus on what they do best to grow their business. So we started looking at Huntsman's clusters, and I thought over time, what GOED, now GOEO, Governor's Office Economic Opportunity with Governor Cox, was looking at us the way he thought, oh gosh, we've got to capture aerospace and defense, but that's Weber and Davis County. And then we could see the MLM and the direct sales market growing in Utah County. I thought we've got to be close down in Draper. Mm-hmm. Out in the Northwest Quadrant is quite different. So the NTSB regulates truck drivers dock to dock 11 hours. They regulate pilots gate to gate 11 hours. It's the reason you're on a plane. Sometimes there's a weather mechanical delay and they do a pilot or crew change. Digital logs came January 1st, 2020. Can't fudge them anymore. So we started looking at the footprint from Salt Lake City, the geographic footprint, because we have 2 things that no one else has. You have I-80 and I-15. So I-15 is an NAFTA highway connecting Canada and Mexico, Tijuana, 11 hours north, 11 hours south. And we have the transcontinental highway, I-80, connecting downtown San Francisco to downtown Hackensack, New Jersey. So we started to build a business based off of freeway on and off ramps on I-15 and I-80. Then we realized goods and products move 4 ways, not 1, road, rail, air, sea. So we needed to make sure that we had connections to each of those different modalities. And over time, the 5th freeway was being built, the digital freeway. So we had to make sure that we had fiber. We have the only 5G business park in this time zone. Now there are others that are coming, digital, 2 or 3 modalities, those businesses that need redundancy, 2 or 3 different kinds of fiber, gas, electric, whatever they need. And so we were able just to capture call centers, data centers. So now most of the paint, most of the auto parts, most of the carpet, most of the F-35 joint fighter parts, most of those products now come over our buildings.
Yeah. Well, I can, you talk about passion, Steve, and I can hear just how you're explaining this so methodical and logical. And just being analytical about the micro and the macro and just why there's demand, why you need to satisfy demand, the tenant drivers, how you lay out your buildings. I mean, it's all very well thought out and planned. It's very impressive what you guys have done.
Yeah, we have an architect we've worked with since the beginning. He was very helpful, and now his son. But we were always tenant focused. If we focused on what the tenants want, the businesses want, we just knew that we could develop better buildings. Like today, I wouldn't build a building without drone ports. Drones are coming next, another modality of travel. There are pilot projects happening with FedEx, Amazon, CVS, Walgreens all throughout America. Eventually, the FAA will figure out how those drones fly. Drone delivery will be coming next, shipping and receiving, so incoming and outgoing. There are other things we're doing into and around our buildings that maybe other developers aren't, based on what our tenants need, what the supply chain needs.
Yeah, love it. So you've been in business now for 22 years or so. I guess, where have you come from? Where have you gone today? I mean, maybe how many square feet have you guys put up? What's kind of the portfolio look like now?
Well, industrial is only a portion of what we do. So we also have urban core buildings in Salt Lake City. Those began as industrial buildings 3-4 generations ago, or life cycles ago. Some of these buildings are 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 years old. And we know that for the Wasatch Front, so 64% of us live in Salt Lake, Weber, Davis, Utah County, it's movable. With a good job, you can move here, rent or own. The challenge is, what's going to make a city more livable? And so we're very committed and devoted at this stage to make sure that we can do our small part to make sure that the Wasatch Front is more livable, and in particular, the Salt Lake City urban core. So we have buildings in 5 of the different council members' districts in Salt Lake City. These buildings are sometimes single tenant, sometimes they're multiple tenants. And so we use some of the cash flow from outside these urban core buildings, from our industrial portfolio and others, and we adaptive reuse these buildings. So we restore these buildings. The granary is really expensive, $200 a foot, and those are big buildings, and those are held within big funds, opportunity zone funds and others, and it's not really a place for small businesses to grow. And so as we have the 9 lane that's building in Salt Lake City, so that's the bike lane that connects the Jordan River Parkway to the Whale at 9th and 11th, 9th and 9th, Best Pocket area. We have the 3 line that's being built. It's not been named yet, but that connects 9th South, the 9 line, to 21st South. Today we have 7th East under construction. That's probably going to be named, or should be named, the 7 line that'll connect the S line that goes to Sugar House, eventually with 9th South. And so we're starting to become much more urban centric. The challenge is that we may not have a city where these businesses can grow, because they need parking. So as Salt Lake City and other cities require ground level retail, it's not working very well throughout America. It works great in Europe. It doesn't work here, in part because the businesses that are there need parking for their staff, for their team members. And with meal delivery service today, just-in-time delivery, you also need 3 or 4 stalls where the food delivery service can park and quickly pick up meals. The other thing is, for restaurants to be successful, you've got to park. We have an urban-centric, car-centric community. So we also have a division that grows urban core buildings. And we have maybe 15 in the city. And we're the largest resident Salt Lake City owner of industrial buildings. So I live in Salt Lake City. We own more industrial buildings than anyone else.
It's impressive.
No question, by far.
And you'd said something earlier, Steve, you said you don't have any K1s or LPs. So, and again, going back to the capital question, but like, how have you been able to snowball your portfolio? I mean,
it's super simple. So I use my father's balance sheet to build a building. And then as soon as we get stabilized, so 95% stabilized, we go to life and pension companies. So we work with Bonneville Mortgage. When we began, we had direct proprietary relationships with Northwestern and Prudential. They liked our buildings. The mortgage correspondents, what Henry and his team have done, Bonneville have grown really large. And so we have Sun Life, Allianz, Mutual of Omaha, a multitude of life and pension companies, lenders that place permanent debt on our buildings.
Yeah. So you just refinance out.
Never had a construction loan.
Okay. Wow. So you build with cash and then pull out and recycle. Yeah.
100%.
So it just, I mean, yeah, I guess going back to the early days, it just takes a few of those initial projects to do well, to be able to snowball and refine.
Well, my father has a strong balance sheet.
Yeah.
And he's been generous, and we can use that project by project. Now, if we acquire half the buildings we bought, half the buildings we built.
Sure.
So it's a blend. So we can see what other developers have done. These urban core buildings are really quite different because they require high touch. So we have a project right now on 1388 South, 300 West. It's a 37,000 square foot building. The business has been in there for almost 100 years. And now we have 7 tenants under construction or open. We're working on our 8th. We need a premium pizza concept. I think it's a hole in the Salt Lake City market. And in each of those buildings, we can sell public art. So we're the only developer in this market that has put public art in or on industrial buildings, in and on our urban core buildings. And I think it does a couple of things. If we want a community that's inspirational and aspirational, Salt Lake City and the Wasatch Front, because we are the capital city, we are the urban core, we've got to make sure that there's a durability and inspiration, all those things that other rising cities have, like in Austin or Nashville, tier 3 communities becoming tier 2 communities, tier 3 cities becoming tier 2 communities. We'll never be tier 1. We don't have a port, host, all the professional teams here, international flights. The tier 1 communities are LA and Atlanta, New York, New Jersey, sure, Chicago, but we're an emerging tier 2. And part of what that takes is, what do these buildings look like? Is there an urban core when you come to one of our 5 national parks, when you come to a convention, you come to ski, a place where you'd spend the night or weekend? And that's where we kind of found an opportunity with these buildings for breweries and bike shops and small businesses. We have as many of those small businesses growing in the urban core as we have industrial.
Yeah, that's smart. And it's great. I love what you guys are doing. And then in terms of just where you are today and where you're going, what do you think the next, little bit, 5, 10 years looks like for Price?
It's a really good question. Our market's changed. So, the first real estate conference I went to, the NAIOP conference in Miami. So Angela began in the business early with us and was like a co-founder, and she was on the Utah board of NAIOP and went on the national board. And so we traveled to Miami 2 years ago to the first national conference after COVID. And at that NAIOP conference, 2 things happened. The keynote speaker and the chief economist and everyone else had been to Utah. And everyone was talking about Utah. If not Utah, why not? And it was the stay-at-home economy, the travel economy, all of those things during COVID. The other thing was life science. Every single seminar had life science. Mm-hmm. Well, we were already pursuing life science and probably have captured as many life science tenants as any. We have someone coming in now, someone else in Draper. And so Utah, because of our airport, so it's a large airport. I'm on the airport board. We have 580 direct flights today. We'll probably get up to 700 when the 99 gates are done in 3 years. We'll have an Asia connection probably within a year. That'll go into Incheon, South Korea. So Utah is now really, really accessible, whether it's Delta. So 60% of us in America fly United, Delta, American, the big 3. So that Delta hub is probably the most powerful nutrient in the Utah economy. Number 2 is probably the University of Utah. University of Utah because of our med school, our engineering school, all the research that we're doing, cancer with Huntsman, a comprehensive cancer center now, and so much more. So those are 2 really powerful nutrients. Then you have Hill Air Force Base in the north, and most of us don't really think about what that means to have that aerospace and defense industry here. There are 2 places in America that make rocket fuel. One is Salt Lake County. There are only 2 copper smelters left in America. One is in Salt Lake County. Yeah. And so those are powerful propellants for the economy. But because of that, other funds and developers are going to come. And there'll be the multifamily developers, they're here, some hotel and industrial. And so our competitive set is going to be different in the future. It's in part what's pushed land to $30 a foot. Yeah. It's in part of what is keeping our construction prices so high, plus the regional growth. It's in part what has pushed some of our industrial rents over $1 a foot. Mm-hmm. Those used to be retail rents, yep, or downtown Class B office rents. Now those are industrial rents. The market's backed off a little bit. And so as we become a tier 3 emerging tier 2 market, we're going to have many developers come and others that haven't been here. Same thing's happening with our law firms. We have really 1 or 2 local law firms left, Ray Quinney Nebeker, and Curtin McConkie. All the rest have merged into national firms. The same thing's happening in accounting. All of our local, regional, and small accounting firms are rolling into larger. And so we're going through a tremendous amount of growth. We had the post-boom after the last Olympics, 2002. Now we're getting, with the games that were announced 4 weeks ago tomorrow in Paris, the pre-boom for the 2034 games. So our competitive set's going to be different.
Yeah. And are you actively looking at opportunities right now to add to your portfolio,
Absolutely.
Steve? Okay.
We're probably hunting more today than we ever had land and buildings.
Okay. And on the land,
we're very active.
Okay. Yeah. And where do you target right now? I mean, do you still have some historic land holdings that you can build on, or are you looking at new land?
We can build 7 or 8 more buildings.
Okay.
So for us, I like interstates and off-ramps.
Okay. Yep.
I've been in frontier markets. We've done frontier work. It'll take a while for those buildings to lease up. And I need high credit, and we like high credit tenants.
Yeah.
Our lenders like high credit tenants. So the stronger the balance sheet, and most of those tenants are going to have immediate access, 5 minutes or less to I-15, I-80.
Yeah.
You just have to have it because of the 11-hour drive time.
Yeah. And have you been able to make, I mean, in deals that you're underwriting right now, are you seeing on the development side, at least, the numbers work, your land basis, your yield that you're trying to achieve? Are you able to hit go on anything here in the next year, do you think?
That's a really good question, Chase. It's the second year we haven't built a building. We paused in 2008 and 9. This is the second year we haven't built a building because we're carrying vacancy.
Sure.
And we're carrying a new building from last year we just finished and a couple of other projects. And so industrial prices, epicenter of the Northwest quadrant, working its way down south of I-15 and probably off 15, 20% to maybe 25% the further south that you go, 10 to 15% traveling north from where they were at their historic highs 24 months ago.
Yeah.
Now for us, because our land and real estate basis is relatively low, we can carry a lot of real estate. The challenges today are vacant buildings are costing more to carry. Mm-hmm. So when we first began, we were paying $20 a yard for cement, $5 a yard for dirt. Today we're paying $20 a yard for A1A fill, $160, $70 a foot for concrete or yard for concrete. So those markets have gone up, those prices have gone up. That's what has driven up rents or markets. The other thing is Salt Lake County continues to raise property taxes significantly and dramatically. Some of our buildings are up 100% in the last 3-4 years, which is really cost and burden to tenants, to businesses. It's part of the inflation that we're seeing. So as we look at the Wasatch Front, it's a very, very dynamic place to be because of our growth. And so when you're growing, there's a certain ratio of industrial space, 1 square foot to every person that lives in a market. And so we'll be strong, and we're going to continue to be strong. The supply chain is going to be strong. We're going to have more product here. We're just going through a lull and readjustment.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's what we're seeing as well. I'll ask a few more questions here, Steve, and then we'll wrap up. You've mentioned the Olympic Committee. You mentioned you're a trustee for the University of Utah.
Correct.
You're involved with the airport. I guess, what's driving you to go above and beyond, just price real estate to get more involved in the community, and what do you see?
Remember earlier in the podcast, we talked about giving back, and whether you consider it a duty or obligation. In my family, it's both. So with my parents growing up, because business was life was business, my parents spent time talking about how do you give back to community, and both my sisters and I heard that and felt that loud and clear. Plus we saw it, we experienced it. So whether it was the reopening of the Capitol Theater after it burned, or when my parents helped fund and build the UMFA up at the University of Utah Museum of Fine Arts, or a multitude of other projects, or I watched things that my parents worked on or gave or did in so many different ways. I just knew that I didn't want this life just to be about building and developing and all those things that come with real estate, the ups and the downs, and maybe some of the benefits. So you give back to community. So I work on political campaigns, many, and still do. I wanted to be on the airport board. That's a mayoral appointment. So I was appointed by Mayor Bukowski and reappointed by Mayor Mendenhall. I wanted to serve as a trustee. I wasn't a great student, but I could see the value and benefit of giving back. That put me on the hospital board. So I oversee the healthcare board as a trustee at the University of Utah. The Olympics, I went to my first Olympics. I've been on the Sports Commission board since 2002, EDCU board since 2002, World Trade Center board since 2006. And I could see what they were doing for the Utah economy. I could see how we were all benefiting. And I wanted to be in and around some of those efforts. So the Olympics was different because Jeff Robbins with the Utah Sports Commission by 2006 was talking about the Olympics coming back. By 2008, he was talking about the Olympics coming back. So we traveled to our first Olympics, 4 of us in Beijing. And it was kind of hard for us. We couldn't get into a place called USA House, but we could see maybe what a future games would be like. And if you propelled to 2011-12, Governor Herbert had formed a exploratory committee for the Olympics, and that looked at volunteers. Would you volunteer again? How many hotel rooms do we have? What are the new sports? How far are athletes flying? And what are the new sports, adventure sports and others like snowcross and ski cross? And the effort was underway, and Fraser Bullock and his team and so many others that had guided the Olympics and run the Olympics in 2002, and consultants now that we had in Salt Lake City, there was a way to maybe work on an Olympic effort. And 4 weeks ago, we were awarded the games for 2034.
Yeah.
And so that was a long journey. That took as much time or involvement, but in a lighter way as it was building an industrial portfolio.
Yeah. I'm sure there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that people don't appreciate. When it comes to investing, so kind of two-part. I mean, money is something that I think is on the forefront of a lot of entrepreneurs' minds. It's a driver, hopefully not the primary driver. But now that you've had success, Steve, how do you think about money, and how do you think about investing perhaps outside of your portfolio? If at all, I don't know if you're diversifying in other real estate ventures or stocks or bonds, or how have you kind of thought about the money game?
I think about people every day. And if I focus on people and community, then everything else becomes a little bit less important and more in the priority stream for me. So I think about our team members in our business every day. I think about our tenants every day. I think about 32,000 students at the University of Utah, some first gen. They've never gone to school. Average length of time in America is 6 years to graduate. In America, it's not because of an LDS mission here in the Mountain West. It takes 6 years. And I could see what higher education does. On the other side, we have trade and technical schools, 8 here in the state, just like we have 8 colleges, universities, plus Westminster and BYU, 10. And we could see what trade and technical schools were doing for people's lives and how it would change their lives, the course, path, and trajectory. One of the strongest balance sheets in America is a plumber or electrician. It is true. If you talk to a credit union, they have some of the strongest balance sheets in America. So I think about people every day. When I think about the urban core, what is it going to take to make sure that we have a city that you want to live in? And it's mountain bike trails. It is urban access. It is scooters. It's making sure you can get on and off I-15. The largest site employer in the state today is the University of Utah. More people come to work at the University of Utah than any other site. Number 2 is Hill Air Force Base. The number of people at the University of Utah is almost the same number, faculty and staff or airport personnel, as the airport. So really powerful. So I think about people every day. And then I kind of work my way down to business and the resource, and what do you do with those resources that you have from cash flow and refinancing events and other things.
Yeah, that's the way to think about it, Steve. I love that. Last question for you and wrap up. When you think about success, or how you define that, kind of like in general, a life well lived, how do you define success in your life?
I think Warren Buffett has said, if you can be surrounded by and loved by the people you want to be loved by and loved by the people you want to be with, that's success. I think Warren has said that. I'm probably not too far off of that. More than that, when one is fortunate or fortuitous enough to be successful or successful enough, to make sure that others, your kids, family, and others that are really important to you, and then spread that out to the broader community, also have every opportunity to be successful. That's success to me.
I love it. Well, no better way to end, Steve. Thank you for sharing your story. I love what you're doing for the community and for others. And again, really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thanks for all you're doing. If I look at the interviewees that you've interviewed and the work that you've done building your own businesses, it's really vital in Utah to hear these stories. And so you are illuminating and bringing to life the work of so many, yourself and others. So I want to thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate the kind words.